we're here today with Neha, and she's going to be sharing her story as an 18-year-old fashion designer and founder of Desoire. So, we're going to hand it off to you, Neha.
So hi, I'm Neha Sikder. I am a senior at Capel High School, and I'm the 18-year-old founder of Desoire LLC, a zero-waste, gender-free fashion brand. I started my company a few years ago to promote the feminine side of gender-neutral fashion that isn't necessarily portrayed in conventional unisex brands. So Desoire is kind of my passion project on using fashion to break away from social constraints, and since then I've grown increasingly passionate about business, sustainability, and inclusion. So we'll first talk a little bit more about Desiree. We'll talk about the effects of fast fashion. We'll talk about some takeaways from our mission and some solutions that you can take to get involved. So first up, a little bit about Desiree. So I started Desiree when I was 14, and my vision was to design truly gender-neutral fashion that's truly expressive, kind of going beyond just the sweatpants and sweatshirts we normally associate with being genderless fashion, and kind of make it more accessible to mainstream consumers. I started by conducting a lot of market research to find that almost every unisex fashion brand I found online produced the same baggy, masculine cutouts that barely scratch the surface of what's possible. You know, fashion can and should be more experimental, not just for the models that you see walking the runways, but for everyday people who just want to make a statement. And so I kind of wanted to challenge the stigma against feminine garments, especially for men, um, and design more fitted garments for everyone, regardless of gender. I kind of drew inspiration from my Indian culture, the clothing styles that men for centuries have confidently worn. A lungi, for example, it's similar to a skirt or a kilt. Even in other cultures, the Scottish, the Greek, if we really take a step back, these styles were the norm for men back then. And these men in such cultures dress with practicality, convenience, and comfort. And that's how we should approach fashion, really, not by reserving it for one gender, but for what makes the most sense for ourselves. And of course, sustainability is at the core of our mission. We try to opt for fabrics that have a minimized environmental footprint. This means producing through closed loop production, and usage of as many natural and organic materials as possible. Now, for our sustainability aspect, some of the eco-friendly materials that we use. So one of my favorite fabrics that we've used in a past garment is called Tencel Modal, and it's a biodegradable, compostable fabric derived from wood pulp that's found in beechwood trees. So we try to use natural fibers or at least recycled or organic material as much as possible. I firmly believe that just doing that extra bit of research and choosing high quality, eco friendly fabrics, you invest in a wardrobe that lasts. And as a consumer, even if you're spending a little bit more money initially, you do end up saving money in the long term. And ethical manufacturing. So to me, ethical manufacturing has to be the bare minimum. I think the standard for fashion houses would be to produce overseas, because it's a lot cheaper, and it's really sickening to see some of the working conditions that are set as a norm for the fashion industry, and that's why choosing domestic production is typically more ethical. There's a lot more communication and transparency within the production process, so it's easier to spot which manufacturers actually support fair labor conditions. And of course, you reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the reduced transportation that you need overseas. As far as sustainable packaging, so our poly mailers, which is what we send our packaging in, it's 100% recycled, and they are global recycled standard certified, and we use soy-based ink for the design on all the packaging. And the key point of sustainable packaging is that less is more. You know, it's so easy to go overboard with packaging and to think that having an over the top unboxing experience is the easiest way to differentiate yourself as a company. But you can still have memorable packaging without the excess plastic. So we try to minimize the material that we use in each shipment. Now, for my favorite part, are zero waste goals. So a large proportion of fashion's waste comes from the pattern making process. So essentially, to get a piece of clothing made, you have to develop and cut clothing patterns. So, if you look at your shirt, um, each fabric is sewn together, and you can see stitches around your armhole, around your torso, etc. Every garment is composed of patterns that are cut out and sewn together, and so you can think of pattern making as a sort of blueprint for how fabric should be cut. Now, the issue with that is that traditional pattern cutting, it can be really wasteful because it creates an excess of fabric that gets thrown away. But our manufacturing partners, they're based in Brooklyn, and they utilize zero waste pattern engineering, which means that the patterns are designed in a manner that they fit together like jigsaw pieces. So there's no space left behind. There's no room for fabric to be wasted, and we use every inch of fabric in the pattern making process. So just through using more innovative sewing techniques, we save around 15% of fabric overall. Now for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So a few months ago, we registered with the United Nations Fashion and Lifestyle Network to implement 2 of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, or called SDGs. And this network, it has about 300 sustainable companies globally, and collectively, these companies, we've kind of worked together to push for over 1,400 initiatives across the world. And the companies in this network have access to virtual seminars, sustainability reports, and data to use as a movement towards our individual goals. And with Desoire, I registered for the SDGs 12 and 13. So that's promoting responsible consumption and production, and taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Having these goals, it really aligned with our vision and added a lot of structure to our sustainability side, and it helped us move one step closer to representing the slow fashion movement. Because in today's age, we are engulfed in mass consumerism. We keep buying and buying without seeing the effects it has on our environment. And the UN, they do a really good job at describing the harm that irresponsible consumption patterns have, but really it's up to us as a consumer to make a change and mitigate the effects of fast fashion. Now, we understand the benefits of slow fashion, but what exactly is fast fashion and why is it so bad? Let's take a look at this TED Talk to learn more.
Ethical clothing can be defined as an approach to the design, sourcing, and manufacturing of clothes that maximizes benefits to people and communities while minimizing the impact on the environment. Ethical clothing is even more relevant today due to the emergence of a new trend called fast fashion. Now, when I say fast food, what words come to mind? For me, I immediately think fast, cheap, and bad. It's similar with fast fashion, where fashion has changed from seasonal styles to something new nearly every week. Prices of clothing has also dropped substantially over time. You can now buy a t-shirt for as little as $7 and a pair of jeans for $15. To keep these prices low, companies outsource their clothing production to countries such as Bangladesh, where wages are very low. Currently, over 92% of clothing sold in Australia is made overseas. They don't just absorb this loss of profit resulting from lowering their prices. They try and pass it down the supply chain in an attempt to offset their loss until it reaches those who cannot pass it down anymore. They are your most vulnerable, those who have no voice. They are your garment factory workers in Bangladesh, China, Cambodia, the poor cotton farmers in India, and the child slaves working in cotton farms in Uzbekistan. There are currently 14.2 million people in forced labor and 168 million child laborers scattered across the globe. More than half the population of Australia works in forced labor, and 7 times the population of Australia in child labor. Most of these people are forced to work in the farms and factories that produce the inputs for our clothing industry. Their wages are so low that they're unable to lift themselves and their families out of poverty, and thus the cycle just continues.
Oh, hey Neha, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
You're you're good.
So, for fast fashion's impact on the planet, so environmental pollution, so water pollution, fast fashion production involves dyeing and treating fabrics, which releases harmful chemicals into water bodies. In fact, textile dyeing is the second largest polluter of clean water globally. Microplastics, synthetic fabrics like polyester release microplastics during washing, which enter oceans and harm marine life. Waste generation, the fashion industry produces over 92 million tons of waste annually, much of which ends up in landfills, taking decades or even centuries to decompose. Water use, producing one cotton shirt can require up to 2,700 liters of water, about the same, almost the same amount an average person drinks in 2.5 years, exacerbating water scarcity in already vulnerable regions. Energy consumption, the production of synthetic fabric like polyester consumes large amounts of fossil fuels, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. The fashion industry accounts for roughly 10% of global carbon emissions. Land degradation, cultivation of cotton and other fibers often involve monocropping, which depletes soil nutrients and increases the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Carbon emissions, the fast fashion supply chain from manufacturing to transportation heavily relies on non-renewable energy sources. This significantly contributes to global warming. Short product lifespans, fast fashion encourages disposable clothing due to lower quality and constant changing of trends, leading to higher production rates and faster resource exhaustion. And of course, deforestation. The demand for materials like rayon and viscose has led to deforestation as trees are cut down to produce these fabrics, reducing carbon absorption and biodiversity.
So now that we've learned about the overall impact that fast fashion has on the planet, we wanted to tie it back into shade seekers and the impact they have on the urban heat island effect. So basically, fast fashion uses materials like polyester, which tend to trap heat and produce a warming effect. Fast fashion produces clothes that are often discarded, ending up in landfills. As a matter of fact, the United States alone contributes 14 million tons of clothing waste annually. And when they decompose, greenhouse gases like methane are released, contributing to warming temperatures around us. Fast fashion's high speed, mass scale production takes up a lot of energy. And because they mostly run on fossil fuels, they emit lots of greenhouse gases that contribute to the warming of the planet, including urban areas where industrial hubs are concentrated. So, here are some takeaways that we hope you can learn from our lesson. So, we hope that you continue to learn from this lesson and put it in action. And you can do this by supporting sustainable fashion brands by like Desoire that prioritizes biodegradable factors and fabrics, ethical manufacturing, and energy efficient production. You can reduce fast fashion consumption by being mindful of what you purchase through research. Invest in quality, long lasting pieces rather than cheap, disposable clothing that can contribute to waste and pollution. Adopt a zero waste mindset. Repurpose old clothing and explore secondhand options. You can participate in clothing swaps or donate to extend the life cycle of garments, reducing waste. Finally, we hope that you can educate and advocate for change. Share the knowledge about the environmental and social impacts of fast fashion within your community. Advocate for policies that regulate pollution and encourage sustainable practices in the fashion industry.
Now let's learn about how you can get involved with shade seekers and support sustainable fashion brands. So here's a QR code that you can scan to learn more about different sustainable fashion brands like Desoire, but also some others that are creating strides in using ethical manufacturing and eco-friendly products to help the environment. And how can you take action to combat fast fashion and create a positive environmental impact in your community and beyond? Well, one way you can do so is by innovating. Think of ways that you can combat fast fashion's impact on the planet, such as starting a fast fashion drive or a drive to spread awareness about the impacts of fast fashion and how you can combat it in your community. Another way you can do so is by researching brands and that practice slow fashion, such as the ones from the QR code on the slide before, and you can support their efforts by shopping from their brands. Another way you can support is by volunteering. You can join Shade Seekers and reduce the urban heat island effect by volunteering at our events. And 4, you can spread the word by sharing this webinar and other educational resources about fast fashion with others. Thank you for listening. All right, so we just have a few questions for you that we got from people who were interested in the webinar, and so we'll just go ahead and ask you some questions about your brand. All right, so it looks like our first question was, how did you manage the mass manufacturing process and the funds for your brand Desoire?
Yeah, so the mass production, manufacturing, honestly, it was just a matter of researching and finding a trustworthy manufacturer. So we were really lucky to find our partner in Brooklyn, who they're extremely credible. We found them through, so it's called the Council of Fashion Design Administration. So they're essentially kind of like a fashion funding network where they offer a ton of resources, and every year they list a directory of different factories that can suit your needs, and they're sustainable, they're trustworthy. So that's how I found the manufacturer, and it made just having that credibility made it a lot easier to communicate and ensure that everything's up to par in that manner. As far as funding, my mom actually, she gave me like $10,000 to start the company, and that really helped a lot for setting the foundation for the company.
Yeah, that's so cool that you kind of took that initial investment and created such a positive impact already.
Another question we had was, how did you manage to get a partnership with the UN?
So I was actually on LinkedIn. I think a huge takeaway that I've gotten from starting a company is that you're only going to get so far if you network and you get your name out there. So I was on LinkedIn. I think I was just messaging a ton of people, and I think by chance one of the people that responded, she worked with the United Nations Fashion and Lifestyle Network. So we talked a little bit, and she told me I think that you'd be a great fit for what we do. So I filled out a form that she sent me, and I think in around August or September we were able to establish the collaboration.
Yeah, that's so cool. I think y'all a lot of times we see fashion brands are greenwashing and things like that, but I think with your company, you're doing a really great job at even partnering with the UN and following their sustainable development goals to create an impact, and also work with, I think you said there were 300 plus companies within that partnership, right?
Yeah, no, it's really awesome, and it is really unfortunate to see the amount of companies that greenwash just for the sake of it, to sound like they're sustainable or good for the environment. But yeah, absolutely.
All right, so it looks like another one of our questions was just asking about your thoughts on the progress of sustainability with within the fashion industry since after the pandemic. So maybe you could like talk about after COVID, how has like sustainability, how has progress of sustainability been within the within the fashion industry. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. Honestly, I feel like there hasn't been much movement in general. I feel like people preach more than they act, and I think with COVID and stuff, people have kind of gotten a little bit more lazy. Um, and maybe, I guess, for companies, I could argue that greenwashing has increased. There's so many brands out there that just, again, lie about things that they do. So I don't think there's been much progress, which is unfortunate, but the good news is that I think our generation is the one to kind of pick up the pieces and kind of start change again. So
Our last question from the Google form was like, what changes would you make to the marketing industry in order to promote sustainable fashion if you could?
yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think that if we really want change to be made, we have to obviously use our voice, but we have to appeal to things that like kids in our generation want to be a part of. And whether that's like, programs or and anything to get kids involved.